A medieval moment. Robin Hood in the matter of the Greenwood. Scholars refer to the cycle of Arthurian stories and legends as the matter of Britain, and to the cycle of Robin Hood ballads and legends as the matter of the Greenwood. And as Professor A.J. Pollard says, everyone knows the story of Robin Hood, only we may not. For example, was Robin a yeoman, either a freeholder of some status or a household official of some status, from Locksley in Yorkshire, or the disinherited Earl of Huntingdon? Did he really rob the rich to give to the poor, or was he simply a common outlaw wolf's head out for profit? Was he active during the reigns of English Kings Richard I and his brother John, or King Edward III? Was Robin active in Nottingham and Sherwood Forest, or farther north in Barnesdale in Yorkshire? Was there ever a real Robin Hood that inspired all the stories? These aren't easy questions to answer. The earliest known reference to the famed outlaw of Sherwood Forest dates to 1377 from English poet William Langland's poem, The Vision of William Concerning Piers the Plowman, in which the character of Sloth says, quote, I cannot parfitly my paternoster as the priest it singeth, but I ken rhymes of Robin Hood and Randolph Earl of Chester, or I do not know my paternoster, the Lord's Prayer in Latin, perfectly as the priest sings it, but I know rhymes of Robin Hood and Randolph Earl of Chester. In other words, Sloth, the lazy person, is saying, I don't know basic foundational Christian prayers that every good Englishman should know, but I know the top 40 rhymes of Robin Hood and Randolph Earl of Chester. Based upon the plethora of Robin Hood novels, movies, and TV shows over the past 50 years or so, most people probably assume that Robin Hood dates back to the late 12th, early 13th centuries during the reigns of Richard the Lionheart and his brother John. However, this snippet of verse, as has been said, is widely believed to be the earliest known written reference to Robin Hood. Also, Robin Hood's original base of operations may have been in or near Barnesdale in South Yorkshire, some 50 miles north of Nottingham and 30 miles north of the tip of Sherwood Forest. Around 1400, a poem called A Little Jest of Robin Hood was written, which places Robin in Barnesdale in South Yorkshire, though Nottingham is also referenced. However, in the mid-17th century narrative Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne, while clearly based in Barnesdale, Robin Hood ranges between Barnesdale and Sherwood and is hunted by the Sheriff of Nottingham, who historically would have had no jurisdiction in Yorkshire. The Little Jest opens with Robin and his band of outlaws in their camp near Barnesdale, with Robin refusing to eat or drink until he has welcomed an unexpected guest to their feast. To that end, Robin sends out Little John, Much the Miller's son, and Will Scarlet to bring back a guest. They return with a knight whom they feast. Upon being told he'll have to pay for the hospitality he's just enjoyed, the knight informs Robin that he is poor, having had to mortgage his lands to the abbot of St. Mary's in York in order to go to bail for his son, who has committed a homicide. Robin loans the knight £400, which the knight vows to repay, setting out for St. Mary's Abbey with Little John to see the abbot. Several of the characters nearly everyone associates with Robin Hood nowadays weren't originally a part of his band. One of the three original outlaws in Robin's band mentioned in the jest was Little John. Around 1420, the Scottish chronicler Andrew Winton asserted that Little John and Robin Hood were active in Inglewood and Barnesdale between 1283 and 1285, while Walter Bower placed them in 1266 in the retinue of the defeated Simon de Montfort the Younger, who quarreled with and took up arms against his brother-in-law, English King Henry III. And a criminal appeal of robbery named Little John is recorded in 1292. 16th century English antiquarian Roger Dodsworth held that Little John hailed from the town of Hathersage in Derbyshire. In one of the traditions, John's surname is Naylor, which probably derives from the fact that a longbow attributed to him, marked with that name, hung in Hathersage Church as early as 1652. John's alleged grave, as well as the house in which he supposedly died, attracted pilgrims to Hathersage. Will Scarlet, Scathlock, or Scarlet, was one of the three original outlaws in Robin's band, according to the Little Jest. However, he was a rather bland character with little to do. The 17th century play Robin Hood and the Prince of Aragon identifies Will Scadlock with Robin's cousin Gamwell, the lost son of the fictitious Earl of Maxfield. One of Robin's original band in the jest, Much the Miller's Son, is given very little to do. In some retellings of the legends, Much loses his surname, the Miller's Son, to Little John. Maid Marian, Robin's love interest, only enters the ballads between 1450 and 1500 via the 13th century May game traditions of France. According to Robin Hood scholar Professor J.C. Holt, the association of Robin and Marian dates to a French pastoral play, Robin et Marian, by Adam de la Halle from circa 1283, in which the shepherdess Marian, loyal to her lover Robin, successfully resists the advances of an amorous knight. English poet John Gower appropriated this story in a poem on vices and virtue he wrote in French between 1376 and 1379, in which he has Robin and Marian participating in rustic festivals, and Gower condemns the revels of certain monks, complaining that they, quote, obeyed the rule of Robin rather than that of St. Augustine, unquote. And yet Marian plays no role in the little jest of Robin Hood, indicating that the two separate traditions probably developed side by side yet independently. The friars, itinerant preachers who took monastic vows rather than cloistered monks, first came to England in 1225 with the Franciscans, and Friar Tuck may be based upon a real person, albeit a much later one. The name Frere Tuck appears in two English royal writs of 1417 and a letter from 1429. The two writs record that a man called Friar Tuck had gathered together a group of outlaws and murderers which threatened the king's peace in the counties of Sussex and Surrey, hunting without licenses and burning the lodges of the king's foresters. The writs commissioned men to identify and capture Tuck and his men, but with little success. By 1429, the good friar was still at large. However, by then it had been discovered that his real name was Father Robert Stafford, chaplain of Linfield in Sussex. Anyone who's seen the 1990s Kevin Costner film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves will undoubtedly remember the character of Azim, played by Morgan Freeman. In the film, Azim is a Muslim whose life is saved by Robin in the Crusades, and believing himself indebted to him, Azim accompanies Robin back to England. Most moviegoers probably think that having a Saracen in Robin's band was an original idea of the film's writers-producers Penn Densham and John Watson, but they'd be wrong. The idea of having a Saracen in Robin's band was originally the idea of Richard Carpenter, creator, producer, and a writer of the excellent British TV series Robin of Sherwood, which aired between 1983 and 1986, and starred Michael Praed and Jason Connery, son of Sean, as Robin of Locksley and Robert, Robin of Huntingdon, respectively. It aired in the U.S. on Showtime as Robin Hood, and in my opinion, it's the best screen treatment of Robin Hood ever done. In Robin of Sherwood, the character Nazir is a former member of the Muslim sect of the Assassins, played by actor Mark Ryan. And while it might seem a bit far-fetched to have a Muslim in Robin's band, it actually might not be. Norman and Angevin rulers often employed Muslim mercenaries, often in return for religious freedom. King Richard the Lionheart employed several Muslim archers in his campaign in Normandy, either POWs from the Holy Land or, more likely, men from northern Sicily. Thus, it might not be that far-fetched to imagine one of these men eventually making his way to England, though there's no actual record that this ever really happened. Robin's chief nemesis in the ballads and stories, as everyone knows, is the Sheriff of Nottingham. He is first mentioned in the Little Jest, though he is never named, and we are not told why he is Robin's enemy, nor why or how the sheriff can chase Robin in Barnesdale in Yorkshire, which is outside his jurisdiction. And as Robin Hood scholar A.J. Pollard says, quote, he is curiously the Sheriff of Nottingham, not the Sheriff of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire as he should have been, unquote. Also somewhat anachronistically, the Sheriff of Nottingham lives in the royal castle of Nottingham with a large retinue of servants, not in a less grand manor house as an actual 15th century sheriff would. The closest one comes to such a figure in actual history is Ralph, Lord Cromwell of Tattershall, who in 1434 was granted in fee, that is, an inheritance with no conditions or restrictions, the royal offices of Constable of Nottingham Castle and Steward of Sherwood Forest. In medieval England, a shire, or county, was headed by the sheriff, from shire reeve, a royal official drawn from the three overlapping groups of barons, royal administrators, and local landed gentry. Among his primarily judicial and financial duties, the sheriff presided over the county court and was responsible for the annual payment made each year by the shire to the king. Because many English counties were so small, it was not uncommon for one man to be sheriff of two adjoining counties, as in the case of the sheriff of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. Should we look for the identity origin of the sheriff in the 13th century, a distinct possibility, there are several possible choices. William of Windeville in 1194, Philip Mark from 1209 to 1224, Eustace of Loudon, Sheriff of Yorkshire from 1225 to 1226, and of Nottinghamshire in 1232, Robert de Vavasour in 1240, Simon de Asselachton in 1260, John de Grey in 1264, and William de Grey in 1266. Brian de Lisle was Chief Forester of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire from 1209 to 1217, Chief Justice of the Forest from 1221 to 1224, and Sheriff of Yorkshire from 1233 to 1234. Yet the Sheriff of the stories is given a character that would be unflattering to Lord Cromwell, or these others, as he is portrayed as a fool, a coward, an oathbreaker, and a drunkard. The sheriff is thus portrayed essentially as, quote, the personification of the malign exercise of power, unquote. Significantly, in the original Robin Hood tales, it is never power, or the divine right of kings, and by extension their noble servants, that is questioned. That is simply taken for granted. It is only the abuse of such power that is bemoaned. And while in certain cases, such as the Abbot of St. Mary's, it is the office, not the individual, which is important to the stories, in the case of the sheriff, quote, it is very much the man, not the office, which is significant, unquote. Unlike his evil companion in Robin's chief nemesis, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Guy of Gisborne is actually named, and in some versions of the story he's a yeoman like Robin, while in other modern versions of the story he's made a knight who works for or is in cahoots with the sheriff. The earliest literary reference to Guy comes from a 17th century manuscript known as the Percy Folio, which includes two earlier Robin Hood stories, Robin Hood, His Death, and Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne. Beginning in 1598 with English playwright Anthony Mundy, Robin Hood became the outlawed Earl of Huntingdon, replacing the earlier yeoman of the Little Jest. By 1700, Robin's birthplace had become Locksley in South Yorkshire, and it was the Victorians who first had Robin robbing from the rich to give to the poor. 17th century Thomas Gale, Dean of York, even recorded Robin's alleged death date as 1247. Celebrations of Robin Hood and the May Games were extremely popular in England and Scotland, and continued in England as late as 1607, despite attempts by Anglican church and civil authorities to stamp them out. Often these May Games got out of hand. In 1509 and 1510, the city of Exeter actually banned any, quote, riot kept in any parish by the young man of the same parish called Robin Hood, but only the church holiday, unquote. By the early 17th century, there would be no more cakes, ale, or Robin Hood performances at local fairs in England or Scotland. But what everyone wants to know is, was there ever a real outlaw named Robin Hood on which the medieval and later legends and stories are based? The answer is, possibly. The late Professor J.C. Holt, in his book Robin Hood, Revised and Enlarged Edition, wrote that, quote, the surname Robin Hood is the earliest indication there is of the legend. Such a name formation of a given name and a surname in a combined surname is very rare. The name invites explanation. The most likely is that a man so called and those who gave him the name knew something of a Robin Hood. It would follow, therefore, that the legend was in circulation by the time such names were used, unquote. And indeed, Holt identified several men in the 13th century with the surname Robohode, several of them criminals. And Alexander Robohode was wanted for theft in 1272. One Gilbert Robohode was released to pledges by the justices after an unspecified charge in Suffolk in 1286. Robert Robohode was indicted in Hampshire in 1294 on the charge of stealing sheep. John Robin Hood and others were charged in 1272 with the murder of a man in Hampshire after a tavern brawl. William Lefebvre, son of Robert Lefebvre, called Robihaud, appears in Berkshire in 1261 and 1262 as a member of an outlaw gang suspected of robberies and harboring robbers. These instances suggest that Robin Hood had become a nickname adopted by criminals by at least 1261, though not without familiar company. In 1292, Little John and a Petty Johann were both appealed of robbery. But was there a real Robin Hood? There was a Hoad or Hood family in Wakefield in South Yorkshire in the 1320s, of which one Robert Hoad, a family member, appears in service as one of King Edward II's porters of the chamber, and who may have been outlawed for supporting Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, who was himself executed for his rebellion against Edward after Edward's defeat at the Battle of Boroughbridge in 1322. In the 1850s, English antiquarian Joseph Hunter argued that after being outlawed, this Robert Hoad and his wife Matilda changed their names to Robin and Marion and relocated to the forest near Barnesdale. This Robert and Matilda figured in the court rolls of the Manor of Wakefield in 1316 and 1317, and Hunter assumed this Robert Hood and the Robert Hood who was one of King Edward's porters of the chamber were one and the same man. Between 1213 and 1216, a Robert Hoad, a servant of Alexander Neckwam, abbot of Cirencester, killed one Ralph of Cirencester in the abbot's gardens. A far more likely candidate for Robin Hood, however, is one Robert Hoad or Hobihaud, a tenant of the Archbishop of York in 1225. In the York Assizes for that year, when the penalties were put into the hands of the king's exchequer at Michaelmas in 1226, they included 32 shillings 6 for the chattels of Robert Hoad, fugitive. The account recurred the next year when the name appeared in the more colloquial form of Hobihaud. This would jive with Scottish historian John Major's claim in 1521 that Robin Hood was active between 1193 and 1194 in the epitaph recorded by antiquarian Thomas Gale in 1702, which says that Robin died in 1247. Professor Holt believes this may be just a bit too tidy and neat, though. For one thing, government records for all of King John's reign are fairly complete and voluminous, and there's no record of an outlaw named Hood, Hoad, Hobihaud, or Robihaud. Second, in the Berkshire case of 1261 to 1262, a clerk might have changed William Lefebvre's surname to Robihaud because he confused a real outlaw with the legend of a criminal hero. Professor Holt surmised the possibility that there were thus several original Robin Hoods like Lefebvre rather than just one, in which, quote, each one acknowledged the legend by adopting the surname or by accepting it from others. Each one contributed to it and thereby became difficult to distinguish from the legend itself, unquote. Thus, we may never know who the real Robin Hood was or if he even existed. As Professor A.J. Pollard says, quote, Robin Hood at the end of the 15th and in the early 16th centuries was all things to all men, unquote. Indeed, each generation reinvents the outlaw. And at the end of the day, it may be, as Professor Holt said, quote, that the identity of the man matters less than the persistence of the legend, unquote. This has been a Medieval Moment with Lee Freeman. For information on this and a variety of other medieval topics, check out the book Medieval Speak, a medieval word book by Lee Freeman.